I'm Matt. About 6 or 7 weeks ago, I released a video where I had 4 of my favorite YouTube creators who were willing to submit a video to me to put together, talking about their experience with their first synthesizer. If you haven't had a chance to watch that video, I'll put a link down below. I recommend checking it out. There's some really great stories and information on there. So if you get a chance, drop by and look at that video. So I really enjoyed the experience of working with the other creators to put that video together. So I thought, well, if I can get some other folks willing to work with me, let's try round 2. So that's what we're doing here today. And again, if you haven't seen the other video, just the real short version of this is a lot of times as you watch synthesizer videos, especially talking about older synthesizers, you may see people talking about, oh, that was my first synthesizer, or I had that one years ago and got rid of it, wish I still had it, hated it, whatever the case may be. But it seems that a person's first synthesizer really resonates with them for one reason or another. So I just thought it would be interesting to get some folks to talk about their first synthesizer experience. Now, in the last video that I did with contributions from other creators, I interjected some thoughts in between each video, and I feel like that made the whole video longer than it should have been. And I'm not going to do that today. If you're watching this video, you very likely know who these 4 contributors are. They all have great followings, great viewership. They're all very interactive in the synthesizer community here on YouTube. So I will tell you who they are and then turn it over to them, and I'll follow up at the end with a couple of extra thoughts. So the first guy in the lineup today is going to be Sam Mims. Syntaur, I'm sure you've seen his videos. If you're like me, you've bought many parts from them. He has a very interesting story about his first synth, and I had a similar experience, but I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to ruin what he's going to tell you. Following him will be Vulture Culture, who has perhaps the best beard on the internet, though there may be some that would contest that. I won't. I'm going to give him the award for best beard on the internet. He also has some great insight about synthesizers, both vintage and current, software and hardware. So you'll be interested to hear what he's got to say. The third contributor is Rick Marston, and Rick has just a great amount of variety of content on his channel. Please check him out if you haven't before. Rick has always been very positive and upbeat and uplifting, and I love to watch his content. He's a great synth player, but I love that he is, again, just very positive and has great things to say. So take a look at him. And last but certainly not least is Synth Samurai, who hosts That Synth Show on his channel. He has one of the best stories I've ever heard about getting into synthesizers, so I can't wait for you to hear that. Stop by and check him out. He's got some fantastic original content on his channel. You will not be disappointed. So without any further ado, let's get to the video contributions, and then I'll follow up afterwards.
Hi, I'm Sam Mims with Syntaur, and this is fun to kind of look back on the very first synthesizers that I had. The first one was actually a Moog Satellite, and boy, it was probably 1977 when I got it, or something around there. And I bought it because it was used and it was cheap and it was all I could afford, and it was a synthesizer. Before that, I had a Univox compact piano. Sounded like, well, it sounded bad. And it was a step up to get the Moog Satellite, but a very small step. But at least it was a real synthesizer. It only had presets, so there wasn't much I could do with it, but it came with a good story. We were doing a gig in New Orleans. Our sound man, who drove the big box truck that all our gear was in, had to stop for something and get something out of the back of the truck. So he unloaded some gear, got what he needed, put the gear back in, backed up to leave. Turns out he forgot to put my Moog Satellite back into the truck. So the dual back wheels of this big truck rolled over the top octave of my synthesizer a couple of hours before the gig in New Orleans. So it was squashed flat, and I actually took a screwdriver and pried up the keys that were jammed down together, pulled them all up. The thing still worked. So I had to transpose down an octave, but I played it on the gig a couple of hours later with the end cap falling off and the keys all smashed and everything. So a remarkable testament to the build quality of Moog instruments. I've been a fan ever since then, and I've owned a Mini Moog for the last several decades, and the Mini Moog is the one keyboard I swear I'll never be without. But that Moog satellite started me off on the road to synthesizers, and I haven't come across any others. I haven't really wanted to come across any others, except for one that a friend gave me, and it is here, and it's probably the only satellite that's in worse condition than the one I own. It looks like this one lived underwater for a while, so it's pretty much worthless. It's probably less than worthless because it takes up space, but I haven't had the heart to get rid of it. After the satellite debacle, I had to get something to replace it, so I actually then bought the first new synthesizer I ever bought, and that was a Yamaha CS5, and it was, again, a very basic synthesizer. It was pretty cheap at the time, but it did sound pretty cool, and it was not just preset, so I could dial in my own sounds. And I used to run that thing through a Univox tape echo, and it sounded really cool. It had the hollow kind of sound, a square wavy sound, and running through that tape echo, it really sounded kind of cool. I haven't had another one since then. We do have a Yamaha CS10 in the shop right now. It's pretty much the same thing, single oscillator, mono synth, and yeah, it's a pretty cool little toy, and I wouldn't mind having another CS5, but I've moved on. There are other synths I have and love, and but I still have an affinity for that one, and so that's kind of the story of my first synthesizers.
Hey, I'm Vulture Culture, and thank you to Matt for having me on the channel to talk about my first synthesizer. So despite my love for vintage hardware synthesizers, I actually started with software synthesizers, which probably isn't that surprising given my age. Our story begins in 2007 or so, and I was in high school in the video department of the School of the Arts here in Palm Beach County, Florida. The video department had a problem, which was that there were all these short films being made, but there wasn't any original music for them. And so they put up on like the little board on the hallway of our part of the building, looking for musicians who were also video majors so we could actually make music for these films. So it was an elective I could take, and it was actually a class taught by a student who had Reason installed on some of the computers at the school. This would have been Reason 4, and around that time, Reason had gotten pretty good at doing sampling of orchestral instruments, so I was actually able to sort of fake a half-decent orchestral sound for a short film or something like that. I didn't end up scoring anything, but I learned some of the basics in Reason and like what MIDI is and things like that. So I don't know if this was in all schools, but my school had something called like the morning announcements where the kids actually read off the news about the school, and all of the TVs in the school tuned into this channel every day. And I actually shot my first YouTube video ever in the morning announcements studio. We put a bunch of green gels on all of the lights in there and set up my DJ equipment, and I actually was playing music I made on Reason but DJing it out. Drop it. And I don't have access to that YouTube channel anymore, but it has over 600,000 views, which I would have loved to be able to get the monetization off of that. But anyway, so I was doing this like hard techno thing, and I really didn't know that much about synthesis, so I was just using a lot of presets from Maelstrom, which was a grain table synth built into Reason, which came out in 2002, which is super interesting because now that I've delved in a little bit more into the late 90s hardware synths, it's actually crazy how incredibly good Reason sounded on a computer, as opposed to at the time in the 90s and 80s, the only way to get those sounds were from hardware synths. So in the 2000s, there was definitely this shift to software because, as a broke punk rock musician, I didn't have the money to go out and buy an Access Virus, which was the synth everybody wanted at that time. So what I did was I actually bought an old computer from CHP Records, which still exists, being run by DJ Grow. I'm happy to still be friends with him. He actually helped me with my Arturia SQ80V video. So they were upgrading the computer for their record label, so I bought their old one. And on that computer, there was REFX's Vanguard and Nexus. And that was really awesome because Nexus was this incredible rompler. They're still putting it out today. And same thing with Vanguard. Vanguard was essentially like a virus, but in soft synth form. And they came out with Vanguard 2 recently. I really need to check it out because I love that soft synth. Vanguard was simple enough of a virtual analog synth for me to get my head around and start making my own sounds, which really made me fall in love with synthesis. So this would have been around 2008, 9, and 10, and the industrial scene in South Florida was really popping off, and I started DJing some of the biggest clubs down here, and things were getting really wild. You could see I have a different haircut once again, and I put out my first album as Vulture Culture Pop Icon in 2011. And I want to say almost everything on that record was either Vanguard or Nexus. Around this time, I got really into sound design, and I felt like something was missing because Vanguard was great for the virtual analog stuff, but that's all it did. And Nexus was full of really great rompler sounds, but I never really felt any ownership over those sounds. I would just pull them up and use them in a track. I really wanted to make my own sound so it could have my sonic fingerprint on it, and my productions could have a completely unique sound, and it wouldn't sound like anybody else. Which is when I came across Spectrasonic's Omnisphere. And that for me was the real game changer, and I still use Omnisphere on basically every production I do to this day. And it also sent me on this journey on YouTube to being focused on synthesizers, because that's when I could really dig in and understand synthesis. I'd been watching Plugin Guru's videos on Omnisphere, and that was actually, before I bought it, how I realized how powerful Omnisphere really is. And I didn't know at the time about Eric Persing's legacy, going back to Spectrasonic's Distorted Reality, which was used by producers like Koji Kondo and Akira Yamaoka's Silent Hill soundtracks. He worked on the JD800, the D50, one of my favorite vintage digital synths of all time, as well as Roland's analog synths like the JX series and the Alpha Juno, which, by the way, I have all of those behind me. When I get questions on this channel about what your desert island synthesizer would be, it's not the CS70M, it's not the Chroma Polaris, it's not the JD800, it's Omnisphere. I'm the luckiest guy in the world to have all of this vintage gear behind me, and I too love the sound of dirty analog circuits and electricity. However, I think what's inspiring about vintage gear is, unlike modern VSTs that do everything like pigments and serum and yada yada yada, these pieces of history only really do one thing well most of the time. So when you want warm analog strings, I'm going to the Poly 6, or if I want a harsh and dirty bass line, I'm probably going to the Polyvox. But at the end of the day, I think Omnisphere is still in a way underrated because a lot of people think of it as a rompler, and it can be that, but it is an insane sound design tool. And one thing that I love about it as compared to other VSTs, I'm not naming names, but Omnisphere can really impart a lot of character onto a sound, and I think it's because of that lineage of Eric Persing's legacy that's baked into the instrument, as opposed to other synths which might be great for EDM or something like that, but they don't have that same character and attention to detail. I think the sonic extensions really highlight this, especially Undercurrent and Twisted Trees. They are so incredible and cinematic and huge and full of character and don't sound like anything else. And that's what I love about Spectrasonics, is they're never content just to do what everybody else is doing at the moment. I've had Omnisphere 2 since the day it came out in 2015, I believe, and it's insane the number of free upgrades they've given me since then. So yeah, not trying to be a Spectrasonic shill or anything, but it truly is my favorite synthesizer to use to this day. And it's also the first synthesizer I bought, if you don't count the synthesizers that were already on the computer I bought from CHP Records. So that's kind of cool that it was, in some sense, the beginning of my journey with synthesis that's taken me to where I'm at now, but it's still the only synthesizer that I feel I couldn't live without. So thank you very much again, Matt, for having me, and I hope this was an enjoyable trip down memory lane.
Hi Matt, it's Rick Marston, Rick Marston Official Synth God XXX. How are you doing today? Wow, the question is my first synthesizer and my first experiences with it, and what, how, and when it changed my life. Well, honestly, I remember when I was a young man, I was going to church, and we had a wonderful, wonderful musician who would sing and do the Lord's Prayer. But he wouldn't do it just singing and do it with just his vocals. He would use the Roland Juno 106. And if everybody knows what a Juno 106 is, it's one of the most beautiful, iconic 80s Roland live performance synths, which is performance synthesizer, and it was a DCO legend. Absolutely, you all know what it is. I wanted that sound, but at the time, in 1985, 86, I don't think I was going to be able to afford something like that. A friend of mine had a synthesizer. His dad actually played keyboards, I think, for backup for Dire Straits, and he owned a Poly 800, the original one, and I got a chance to toy with that. So I knew it was something I could do, something I was interested in, that it's something that will be a part of my life. Now, I couldn't afford the Poly 800 at the time. I couldn't afford a Juno 106 at the time. I was too young for that. I didn't have a job. But later on, like 88, 89, I started my first job in 89, and I remember saving some money up, and I bought from a friend at the time, digital was the rage, a DX9, a Yamaha DX9, which is the 4-operator, 6-algorithm version of the DX7. And I thought I was going to get the same sounds. I was going to sound like the Juno 106. It's going to be... No. I was getting clink, 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 bling, bling. So, not the same sounds as I was going to be getting from the Juno 106. Very limited programmability with the 4 operators and the 6 algorithms to really base with. But it was, something that I could use as a MIDI controller for something later. I knew for sure that I needed a better synth. After that, I remember buying a Poly 61, a Korg Poly 61, non-MIDI. This wasn't the Korg 61M. I do remember really getting lost in playing with the deep cutoff and resonance, and just playing with long release for hours until the sun rose. It was a very cool experience to have a Poly 61, because it was like the Poly 800 with knobs, and you can do stuff, but there was some pros and cons on those two synths. But I kind of learned some of the basic analog synthesis programming tips by using the Poly 800 originally. My friend Mike, his dad's Poly 800. I really learned how to do a lot of menu diving with the Poly 800. The Poly 61, you had a diagram to the side, a quick action, a couple knobs. It was quite cool to use. So those two synths kind of got me into, and of course, seeing and hearing what a Juno 106 sounded like, which was lush and warm. The Poly 61 delivered similar type of tones and textures, so I was addicted. From there on out, I knew that I had to get, and I had an EMU drumulator, the emulator drumulator. That's right, it was the emulator drumulator, non-MIDI drum machine, and I was trying to sync my arpeggios from the Poly 61 to the drumulator unsuccessfully, but it was very cool to try to do these crazy, it sounded something like from the early 80s, Alien Sex Fiend, stuff like that. Very cool electronic stuff with crazy arpeggios, crazy loops and stuff like that. So those are the things that kind of got me started, my kickoff. And as you can see behind me now, I've got various synths from Arturia to Sequential and Yamaha, and I just love it. I absolutely am addicted, and I feel that anybody who gets into synthesis, whether it's software or hardware, there's so much to do and so much to create. There's so much room for sound creation, music creation, and using anything from hardware or software nowadays is going to open your soul to a whole new world of magic, I think, in my opinion. My friends were getting into digital synthesizers at the time, and they were playing with the Ensoniq ESQ1. They were playing with the incredible InSonic, what was EPS, the InSonic EPS 16. They were playing with the Emax, the EMU Emax sampler. So at the time, a lot of my friends were totally embracing that I was interested in and that I was working with at the time, were into a lot of the digital sound, and were dumping their analog synthesizers. And so that's why I was able to get the opportunity to buy the Poly 61 off a friend after they had already sold me the DX9. I believe they traded that back to them and paid a difference on the Poly 61. Because the Poly 61, to me, the sound was more what I was looking for. It had that 80s vibe, a little bit of a Flock of Seagulls, a little bit of Devo, a little bit of Duran Duran and Depeche Mode and The Cure. So that was cool with me. I really wanted to have that sound, really. And that's what even today, in 2023, 2024, I'm still embracing that 80s vibe, that analog vibe with the TIC-5, my Juno, my Alpha Juno, which I still have, which is one of my favorite old vintage synths. This beautiful FM synth, the Super FMX, is phenomenal on the Modi X and the Montage, which just got recently discontinued. Soon I'll have the Behringer Pro 800 come in here, and I'll be able to work with that and start creating some more of the Thompson Twins kind of Talking Heads kind of funky sound, and have some really cool Japan sounds. I love old school Prophet sounds, and the Pro 800 is going to do it. I know, I'm going to enjoy it. Love my Arturia, the Stellar, the Microfreak Stellar is awesome. My Monologue is one of probably the best things for solos. The Polygrid is the best synthesizer on the market right now. I'm sorry, hands down. I want the OBX8 by Oberheim sequential. That was just a little bit out of my league. And yeah, I'm collecting the drum machines from Behringer. I absolutely love this little friend of mine. What a cool little drum machine. Makes me want to have a good time and play all day, all night long. So, anyways, appreciate you, love you, peace and respect. Talk to you very soon, and I hope this helps, and I hope that you guys have a good time exploring synthesizers and making incredibly killer music into the future. Peace.
How's it going, everybody? This is Synth Samurai from Synth Samurai Productions and That Synth Show. I want to give a big thank you to Matt Wright Music for offering me a chance to put together this little video to you guys, explaining to you what was my first synthesizer, how I felt about it, do I still have it, and what was the story behind it. So, thank you, Matt. He's got a great channel. You're one of the motivating factors why I even started my channel. You might not know that, but thank you, man. I appreciate it. So, what was my first synthesizer? Well, let me tell you the story about it. I'm from Newfoundland, Canada, and I had a friend of mine who invited me over to his farm one night, and he said, man, you got to come over and check this out. So I came over. Unbeknownst to me, he had built a shed in the woods, and he filled it with synthesizers. And at the time, I didn't know what synthesizers they were. They were Junos, they were Behringers, he had Rhodes pianos, he had Arturias, he had MIDI controllers, and the whole thing was wired up to everything, can control everything. I was blown away because I'm not a musician. I never played music, and this was only back, I don't know, 2017, 2018, something like that there, pre the old world. So he invited me over, went out, opened the door, walked in, there was lights, he had lights going. He was like, do you want to jam? I was like, I don't know how to play anything. He was like, man, synthesizers are beautiful. Sometimes you can just play them. And I was like, okay. He took the lead. He started messing around. I was like, what do I do? He's like, just touch something, see what happens. So, man, we got lost. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 hours went by. We were lost in sound. As you guys know, I'm sure, when you play synthesizers and you get that first taste, it's something that's almost undescribed, but I know everybody watching this video, tuning into Matt's channel, knows exactly what I'm saying. So we got lost in the music. It was overwhelming. Time stopped, but it also sped up. We recorded the whole thing. And after that, he gave me this synthesizer to take home, and it happened to be the one I was messing around with that night. And the only reason I was messing around with it because it was the smallest one, and I was like, I guess I'll use this. So it was the Arturia Matrix Micro Brute, the Arturia Micro Brute, the small little one from Arturia, built like a tank, super raw sound and gritty, very simple synthesizer, but also complicated. But man, I think it's like for a beginner, you can't beat this synthesizer for wanting to learn subtractive synthesis. It's got everything you need. It's got the waveforms. It's got a cutoff resonance. It's got a little patch bay in the top right corner. And you can just mess around. It's got a built-in, like, super simple sequencer. You can just program some notes in, let it rip. It doesn't have any effects. So later on, I went and bought these pedals here, the Polera, Obscura, and Notilla chorus, reverb delay, and I put them on the Micro Brute, and man, it blew my mind. That's when I really was like, holy wow, synthesizers. So I picked it up during COVID. COVID kicked in. I wasn't using it. He gave it to me. It was sitting around. I picked it up, plugged it in, and man, from that day, I've just been gone, you know, acquiring gear. I got some gear around here, and the cool thing about it was he gave me that synthesizer. That was the first synthesizer he ever used. So I had a friend come over a little while ago, and he walked into the studio, and he was like, man, this stuff's cool. Turned it on, messed around for a bit, and I was like, you know what? I told the Kundalini Cowboy, which is his name, Martin St. Pierre, aka Pedro Martini. He said, you know, give it to somebody if they feel it. So I looked at him and I was like, dude, you want this thing? He was like, you serious? I was like, I'm serious, take it. So he took the Micro Brute now, and he's deep diving and going down the rabbit hole of synthesizers himself. So it's a wonderful thing. I don't have it anymore. Would I get it again? I don't know if I'd get it again or not. I have my time with it, and everything I got can do the same. And I'm enjoying, he sends me some videos every once in a while. It sounds awesome, stuff he's doing with it, but it's such a cool synthesizer, super simple, super awesome. So the Arturia Micro Brute, that's my first synthesizer. I hope you guys enjoyed that little story. He's still got the shed, it's still amazing, and he's racking up more synthesizers in there, switched them up, changed them out, and you know, thank you, Matt Wright, for getting me on your channel and introducing me to your audience. Again, I'm Synth Samurai. Check out my channel, that's Synth Show, 2 videos a week. Thank you, Matt Wright Music, you're amazing.
So I want to thank my guests today for their contributions to this video. Please go check out their channels when you're done here. They all have some great content and you will not be disappointed. So thanks again for stopping by. If you haven't already, I recommend that you consider subscribing to the channel. If you like what you see here, leave a like and a comment, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.